Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Boating Town Hall web conference. My name is Cleve Hardacre. I'm President of Recreational Boaters of California. RBOC is the boating advocacy organization for California. This webinar is jointly hosted by RBOC and BoatUS Government Affairs, the voice of recreational boaters on Capitol Hill. I'll turn this over to David Kennedy from BoatUS.
Thank you, Cleve. Again, my name's David Kennedy. I'm the Manager of Government Affairs for BoatUS. Those who maybe don't know, BoatUS is the national organization for boaters, 700,000 members nationwide, 66,000 of those in California. We've partnered with RBOC for many years. They are the eyes and ears and voice in Sacramento for California boaters. So we're really pleased to be able to join you all for this web town hall and look forward to filling you in on what's going on.
And now Ray.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. I'm Ray Durazo, immediate past president of RBOC. Today, you're going to hear from my colleagues, David Kennedy, BoatUS Government Affairs, Winston Bumpus, RBOC Vice President North, and Todd Lichthauser, Vice President South. Our moderator is Jerry Desmond, RBOC Legislative Advocate. And you've already heard from Cleve. The format for our conference is that these folks will make brief presentations on the issues RBOC is working on. That will be followed by a question and answer session. Because we're coming to you as a webinar, there are a few things to remember. You can see and hear us, but we can't see or hear you. You can submit your questions or comments with the Q&A Zoom feature at any time during the conference. Next slide. On your screen are the topics we will be discussing. We realize that some of these topics will be of particular interest to some. Some of these topics are rapidly evolving. Some could easily be the topic of an entire webinar conference. So if you feel a topic merits a deeper dive, let us know. We may have additional web conferences in the future on those topics. So don't forget, use your Q&A feature on your screen to submit questions while you're thinking about them. Jerry will sort out the questions we receive and they'll be assigned to speakers during the interactive part of the conference. The first topic today is the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on boating. Here to cover that subject is RBOC President Cleve Hardacre and BoatUS Government Affairs Director David Kennedy. Gentlemen.
Thanks, Ray. Got to remember to unmute. The topic started out being fairly modest, and it's grown and changed dramatically over the last few days, so it's pretty comprehensive right now. The main thing is that there are a lot of different situations in the different regions. The health department in San Diego has imposed the most drastic prohibitions on boating in California. However, we expect a reopening announcement today. It hasn't happened yet, but we tremble with anticipation. The order stated that swimming, surfing, paddleboarding, boating for recreational purposes, and all other water recreational activities are prohibited in public waterways and at beaches. They've lifted the restriction on beaches already. We're hoping they're going to open up the bay today. There are several organizations in San Diego that are pressing to relax the restrictions, and there's a petition by individual boaters. So there's a lot of pressure to do something here. And the situation is dynamic. In Sacramento, Sacramento County announced yesterday that boating was going to be allowed. Coast Guard San Francisco canceled the meeting scheduled for May 6th because of the lockdown restrictions extension, but they have not prohibited boating. The governor is scheduled to announce today that state beaches and parks will be closed from tomorrow because they become too crowded last weekend. So this should be a caution to boaters. If boating is opened up, don't flout the social distancing regulations. There is no uniformity throughout the state. RBOC will work with local jurisdictions to prioritize opening the waterways for boating and to develop standard guidelines for practicing social distancing for boaters. It would be helpful if the state authorities would standardize guidelines. To that end, an organization called Boating United has initiated a letter writing campaign to the state governors, all the state governors, asking that boating be recognized as an approved activity. We'll see where that all goes. In any case, RBOC does recommend that boaters practice social distancing, wear masks, go in family groups. Whatever your local restrictions are, please follow them. We are going to strongly urge any authorities that have restricted boating to reopen it. Now I'll let David Kennedy talk about stuff from a national point of view.
Sure, thank you, Cleve. It really has varied around the country, just as California seems to go from location to location. That's what we've seen as well. Some states much more restricted than others. The three most extreme versions have been Washington State, Michigan, and Maryland, actually, where I keep my boat. The Washington and Michigan, have rolled those back to some extent. Maryland, we still have it in place. And we even, other places we see it go down to the county level. Florida, for instance, it was much more restricted further south where they were having more impact from the virus. But that continues to evolve as it goes along. So it really has been one of those things where it's been out at the state and local level. As in our conversations with the sort of federal government, with Coast Guard and things like that, that's really where they have pointed as the way where a lot of these regulations are going to be implemented. So the thing BoatUS has been advocating for nationally is that consistency in what they do and to treat recreational boating as they do any other recreation activity. Where we saw that where people would ask, well, it's okay if I go bike riding, but not okay if I go out in my sailboat and things like that. So what we've really asked for is let's respect what the proper health guidelines are, but be consistent in what you do. And we have continued to see that evolve. The other thing that we're really talking with officials about is that as they go to open things up and provide it, is that they want to keep the marine businesses and the boat ramps and all that infrastructure. We want to have as much of that open as possible because that's going to help to mitigate any concentration of people as they go along. So we think that's going to be an important part of the restarting of our part of the economy. And as Cleve mentioned, it's going to be very important and incumbent on boaters to show that we understand and what's the right way to do it. I think for the clubs, they do need to think about how they can turn to their local health officials and demonstrate what it is that they're doing to meet the social distancing guidelines and the new sanitation regulations, things like that. It's going to be incumbent, I think, as it was for a lot of businesses, for the clubs to do that for themselves.
Well, thank you, Cleve and David. And next up we have Winston with the some other aspects of this COVID-19 and what is available to clubs. Do we have Winston?
Thank you, Jerry. And yeah, so certainly the issues around COVID-19 have been safety issues and getting out on the water. But one of the big things that are facing a lot of clubs is the financial impact. Being closed and not really being able to operate. Some clubs have used their facilities as public outreach. They're really a part of the community. And many clubs have employees that have been laid off, and clubs are having the impact on their finances. So one of the government has put through the Small Business Administration, and we're all aware of these various programs, relief bills that have been passed. The first one that was passed provided for a couple of things that clubs could be aware of. One, of course, is the economic injury disaster loans, which allowed up to $2,000 per employee, a maximum of $10,000. Now, this is a stopgap measure, but clubs that are really struggling is an opportunity. That program allowed not-for-profits, nonprofits like clubs are, and I know some clubs have applied. I'm not sure any have received it. I'm also aware that we have most clubs are 501c7s, which are not-for-profit clubs. Some are actually private businesses, and some have secondary foundations that are 501c3 charities. So the PPP, or the Payroll Protection Program, really provided money for forgivable loans that could cover 2 months worth of salary, utilities, and rent to help during this difficult time. Well, the challenge with that is it only was allowed, regular corporations, businesses, sole proprietorships, but for the nonprofits, it was only for 501c3s and 501c19s, but did not provide support for 501c7s, which is most of what clubs are. So that's when the Congress was working on this bill. We put out a call to action in conjunction with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the National Club Association, basically stating that 501c7s, clubs, are really small businesses too. And it didn't seem fair that they were left out of the relief. So we put together a call to action, and many of you participated. We thank you for doing this, notifying your senators and your congressmen in Washington. And we know that when they passed the second relief, which is second round, which was much needed, it still was not included. So we're not done yet. We think there's going to be more rounds, more discussion, and we think if we keep the pressure up and say, look, clubs provide community support, community activity, kitchens, and they're being affected. Employees are being laid off. People are taking financial hit with this. So we really want to continue to support this call to action. It's rboc.org, call to action, and you can see where you can contact your folks in Washington and let them know the next round. Please consider 501c7s as small business as well, and make that relief available to them. And that's what I had to say on this. And at this point, we're going to turn it over to Jerry to talk about some exciting stuff going on with the Department of Boating and Waterways.
Thank you, Winston. And we know, folks, as you're on, participating in this webinar, we're receiving the questions, and we know that the key issue for everybody today is COVID-19. And so at the end of this presentation, like Ray mentioned, we're going to have a Q&A section, and we'll get to your questions. So please just do submit those questions, and we want to recognize as we are going on here that that is the key issue of the day. There are some other issues that RBOC and the boating community are involved in. And a big one is the Division of Boating and Waterways in state parks and what we call our Harbors and Watercraft Revolving Fund, or your Harbors and Watercraft Revolving Fund. DBW is a division in the state's Parks Department. Several years ago, the boating community and boating stakeholders and boating industry tried to preserve DBW as a department, and it became a division, Cal Boating, in state parks. And it has a number of programs and services that it provides to boaters. And this list of 19, this is not something we made up. It's right off the DBW's website. And it has a wide range of programs and services, from yacht and shipbroker licensing to for-hire guide licensing to aquatic centers like the one in Natomas and one down in San Diego, the Boating Clean and Green Campaign, a Clean Marina program together with the California Coastal Commission, subventions for boating law enforcement officers for training and for their boats. capital outlay, both public marina loans and grants and private marina loans for everything from launching ramps and marinas at low interest rate loans to the new California Boater Card, that is a certificate that those 35 years and under should have. That's a number of programs, well, even the surrendered vessel program to turn in your boats instead of abandoning them on the waterways. So there is a lot that the boating community has developed for a statewide effort, and it's funded by boaters only. There is no state general fund or other sources of funds. The Harbors and Watercraft Revolving Fund is comprised primarily of boat gas tax dollars that boaters pay. A certain amount of what you pay at the pump is attributable to boats, and it's deposited into the state funds, and it's sent to different programs, including what we call the HWRF. The other sources of funds include the registration fee dollars that we pay, as well as interest payments back on loans that the division and the department prior to it gave, as well as some federal monies that David will talk about when we get to infrastructure. Now, this is in play this year. There have been discussions at Boating and Waterways Commission meetings about the deficit in the Harbors and Watercraft Revolving Fund. As we get close to a state budget for the fiscal year that begins on July 1, the state legislature is partially returning. The state legislature has a constitutional requirement to pass a budget by June 15th. That'll get done. And there could be a budget trailer bill associated with a budget that could reform the HWRF and perhaps these programs and services that are provided. Some could be on the chopping block. There are some that could be eliminated. There are some that could continue, and there could be increased revenues that are sought. An example is, so we look at the boating gas tax dollars that we pay to the state, and RBOC and other boating stakeholders are raising questions about how much is that money and where is it spent? Right now it is paid to the state and it is directed to the HWRF, but also to other funds such as the State Parks Recreation Fund, including the gas tax dollars that were just recently approved with SB1. And it also goes over to the state parks as well. So not all boating gas tax dollars go into the HWRF. And for a number of years, a significant amount of those tens of millions of dollars per year have been directed to other programs and services that don't benefit boating in the view of RBOC and others. Another is boat registration fees that could be in play. The boat registration fees are $20 every 2 years, and about double that if you're in an area that has some quagga and zebra mussel infestations. And there is perhaps a chance that a budget trailer bill would increase the boat registration fees. How much, we don't know. We haven't seen what it would be. And also at risk is boating infrastructure programs. Like we've said for years, there's been an opportunity in state law for financing for both public and private marina. Public marinas can get loans and grants. Private marinas can get loans. And for a few years now, there haven't been any applications and no expenditures of monies, which means that boating infrastructure to meet the future is not being constructed. And it also means that the interest payments back on from these loans are not being placed into the Harbors and Watercraft Revolving Fund. There are efforts that are getting underway right now with RBOC and aligned stakeholders, BoatUS, NMMA, CYBA, if you know those acronyms, PICYA, SCYA, the boating safety officers, to raise some serious questions in the weeks that are coming up towards a July 1, state budget adoption. And with that, I want to make sure to also give an opportunity. There are federal aspects to this and federal funding. And if I might, David, ask you to add on from the federal level, BoatUS's particular knowledge and efforts.
Sure, thank you, Jerry. Yeah, it's important to understand something about this boating infrastructure and overall. There's a federal program out there called the Sport Fish Restoration and Boating Trust Fund, and this is where we capture the federal fuel tax dollar and also taxes you pay on fishing equipment, and there's about 6 different things that feed into this fund that then go back out for boating safety, fish habitat, a number of programs that matter to all of us out on the water. Well, this program goes hand in hand with the state program. It's actually, there needs to be a state match, and the state needs to be specific about how they dedicate their funds in order for them to get the federal money. So they can't divert any registration fee or they won't get any of their boating safety money and examples like that. So it's very important. The state, if they start diverting these funds, there's the potential that they will lose federal funds. from this. So the trust fund overall is something that BoatUS works on a regular basis. It's coming up for reauthorization this fall. It expires in September. It's about every 5 years. Anticipate that we will be successful in that given all the talk of infrastructure bills, but we continue to monitor it to make sure that the program stays in place and that these funds continue to flow out to the boating programs out there. So like there's the important state component. That's why it's great that we're paying attention in Sacramento and then try and feed the federal part.
Thank you so much, David. And next we turn to fix-it tickets.
Okay, very good, Jerry. My name is Todd Lloyd-Hoiser. I'm the RBOC Vice President South. And there are 2 pieces of legislation this year that you should keep on your radars that affects the boating community. We support both of those pieces of legislation. They are sponsored by the Sheriff's Association. And the first one that I'll be talking about is fix-it tickets. Currently, if you are cited while boating without the proper number of PFDs or a fire extinguisher, you are subject to a fine, and the fine is actually pretty expensive. So this, again, it's sponsored by the Sheriff's Association. They're trying to provide a safer boating community. And so this would allow you to remedy that by getting the proper number of PFDs, making sure your vehicle is registered, and that your IDs are in place, and that you have serviceable fire extinguishers. So then your ticket would be hopefully expunged, and you would become a better, safer boater. Now we'll turn it over to Winston, who will talk about for-hire vessel operators.
Hello, Winston.
This is an interesting bill. For many of us who sail on the bay and navigable waters, and I was unaware there's a separate set of operator's license required for vessels for hire if you're on inland waters. So certainly the Coast Guard doesn't have jurisdiction there, but the state does. So these are inland waters that aren't interstate traffic, so excluding Lake Tahoe. And there's a whole licensing program. It's kind of parallel to the U.S. Coast Guard license. But what they found was that in the current state licensing, that you could have up to 3 people for hire in your boat without having to have a license. So unlicensed people could take people out. Well, the problem with that is there's been several incidences of people doing dangerous things because they didn't know all the rules, didn't have all the equipment, and so this rule is intended to change it that for a single for hire person, like the U.S. Coast Guard, if you're taking out 1 person for hire, you need to have a state license just like on the regular waterways. The only challenge with that is that we were concerned about is that there's a whole bunch of exceptions in the U.S. Coast Guard regulation. For example, in the Coast Guard regulations, if you're a sailing instructor with sailing students, you're exempt from having a Coast Guard license. And it makes perfect sense. You're in a sailing school, probably have lots of certifications, but you're not a U.S. Coast Guard captain. And you may be taking individuals onto a powered boat, picking them up out of the water, taking them out to races. And so what we want to be sure, as we do a lot of these rules, is take a look at it from the boater's perspective and make sure it has parity with the current regulations for U.S. Coast Guard. If you want to match it up, just don't change the rule from 3 down to none. We want to change the rule so it's consistent, so whether you're on inland waters or not. And so this bill is coming up also from Monning, also input from the Sheriff's Boating Association, and we'll continue to monitor this and make sure that when they implement it, they don't have unintended consequences. And I'm going to move over to one more issue that's something that came from a lot of requests from boaters. as you may recall, in 2018, RBOC, with input from the boating community, lobbied for a audit of BCDC. Our concerns were that their fines were arbitrary, and sometimes the money that was coming in apparently was instead of going into the abatement fund, it was actually going towards salaries and hiring staff. All of these things were, fraught with challenges because BCDC does lots of great things for the environment and the community. At the same time, when you have an agency that reports to the governor and doesn't have a lot of oversight, it's important to do an audit every once in a while and see if we can do so. Like I said, 2018, a bipartisan bill was put forward, an audit was done. 2019, we saw the result of the audit. And so now, Assemblyman Speaker Pro Tem Kevin Mullen has put forward this bill, which would basically make it law that they could not any longer use money collected for fines for salaries or enforcement. It had to go to the abatement fund. And what that does is it stops the incentive of, if I put more fines in, I got more money I can pay people with. That shouldn't be what it's about. The fines are about doing corrective action if people have broken their permit or not complied with the permit. The second piece, which was important in this bill, is they're requiring that BCDC put together a matrix of infractions and fines so they're standardized. It doesn't become arbitrary. And this is really important. There's other issues we're concerned with BCDC. They're supposed to have a citizens advisory committee by law, but which hasn't met in 17 years. But we feel that this piece of legislation is a good one and helps move us in the right direction. So there will be, now the question is, some of these bills may get pushed off to 2021. There's a chance that it's not going to be a high priority bill for this legislative session. But as you see, there's a call to action. RBOC, if you go to call to action, there'll be a place where you can comment to Assemblyman Mullen and let him know what you feel. And I think the last time the boating community got behind it, we made a difference. We hope getting by this again, and RBOC's continued advocacy will help improve the situation with BCDC in the San Francisco Bay. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ray Durazo, who's going to give us an update on what's going on with the Delta Tunnel.
Thank you, Winston. Planning for the Delta Tunnel continues. RBOC has stated its opposition repeatedly and consistently in opposition to the proposed project. It's expected to disrupt boaters' access and navigation of Delta waterways for the estimated 17 years it takes to complete the project. It will likely cause significant environmental harm to the Delta ecosystem. And big questions remain. What will the project cost and who's going to foot the bill? What will they do with the vast amounts of soil that are dug up? What are the threats to the Delta environment, fisheries, and water quality? RBOC continues to monitor the planning process and express its concern to state leaders. Our next topic is state fishing licenses, and Jerry Desmond will cover that.
Sure, folks. We're getting close to the end of the presentation and the Q&A, and just want to mention a couple of other bills that got active last year, sponsored by, in this case, the sports fishing groups. AB 1387 by Assemblymember Wood would enable fishermen to purchase their licenses and get it on a rotating basis 365 days a year. Ran into some issues with costs last year. I understand there's some behind the scenes conversations going to see if that can get reactivated this year. The second bill is a bill that's been pursued a few times, This time it's AB 1111 by Assembly Member Laura Friedman, and it's a legislation that would establish a statewide office of outdoor recreation, and that would be a cabinet level office. And this is a bill that RBOC supports, provided that the funding for such an office doesn't further detract from real programs and services that directly impact boaters and benefit boaters, and that could be accomplished perhaps. And this is another issue that's got a federal perspective and multi-state perspective that David with BoatUS can enlighten us on.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. Yeah, the creation of this office is part of a larger nationwide effort to get policymakers at all levels of government to understand the value of outdoor recreation. There's a coalition came together here in Washington called the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, consisted of all of the different groups that are involved in all the fun that we have outdoors. So think RVs, boats and fishing, snowmobiles, the horse folks, biking. It's really a great coalition, and got together, actually got a study from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which is the official statistics keeper for the Department of Commerce, to look at outdoor recreation overall. And it turns out it's 2.2% of our GDP is attributed to the different activities that we do outdoors. To give perspective on that, that's bigger than the oil and gas industry. So what we've been trying to do is to elevate this up at all levels. And so having a cabinet level position, that someone who will bring up recreation issues, and from boating and fishing, we're the single largest part of it. So a lot of it, we really see this as a way to advance the policies that are going to benefit all of us out there. And that's why we've been behind this effort.
Thank you, David. And next we'll go back to Ray for the summary. You're on mute there, Ray.
Thank you, Jerry. That completes the presentations of topics for today's web conference.